I got you.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Smart Biz Advisors podcast. I'm your host, John Jones, and today we're discussing how to maximize your business expenses. It's really a guide to claiming what's yours. So I'm joined today, as always, by my good friend and close associate, Mark Fackrell, who is a seasoned veteran with decades of experience in both finance and accounting. And today we're going to discuss uh, business expenses. So, welcome, Mark.
Good morning, John. Nice to talk to you as always.
Yeah. So, uh, let's start with the basics. What exactly are business expenses and why are they important?
That's a great question. So, business expenses, put simply, are the expenses that you have to use to operate your business. And the reason that they are important, they're important for a couple of reasons. It's important for you to see how profitable your business is. The big reason, though, that people want to track these things is so that they can get the proper tax deductions when they, prepare their tax returns. People talk a lot about, getting write-offs, and this is basically what we're talking about. And there's a lot of things that companies do that they can claim on their taxes that they may not necessarily realize. So hopefully we can spend a little bit of time talking about that today. I am not a CPA. I don't do tax returns, but I know enough to be dangerous, and I know enough to point people in the right direction. And obviously, any of this tax stuff, you've got to work with your own CPA on and get their advice. But we will get you on the right track and at least have something for you to be able to work with your CPA with.
Great. Sounds good. So, with that said, let's start off. What are some of the most common types of expenses that business owners can claim?
So, the most common expenses are, things like advertising, things like business cards, websites, ads for Google AdWords or whatever it is. Basically, just anything that you're spending money on for your business, you want to keep track of that separately. So one of the easiest ways to start doing this is to open up a separate bank account or use a separate credit card that you just use for the things that you use for your business. Mm-hmm. And that way you can log into that account and you say, okay, these are all of the things that I'm using directly for the business. So that gives you a good starting place.
Okay. So we've got rent, utilities, office supplies, marketing, professional services, insurance, salaries, and so forth. So these are all kind of main categories.
So those are all main categories. And, a lot of the things that you described apply to businesses that are more established and more operating. I know that, a lot of the people that we're trying to help are people that are, earlier stage. So they may not have salaries. They may not have salaries for other employees. They may not even have salaries for themselves. They may not have rent directly.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
But you know what? You run down to Office Depot to get something to help you with your business. That's definitely something that you want to be tracking.
Yes. So definitely from the get-go, you're going to have office supplies and maybe advertising is probably the most common ones.
Yep.
So other than these common ones, are there any other types of expenses that business owners tend to overlook? Are you able to shed any light on something that they might miss?
So it's interesting. So what the IRS will allow you to do is if you have things that you use for yourself and for the business, is they'll recognize it if you say, okay, I've got a house, but I use this office, for example, solely for the business. You can actually deduct that. So if my house is 1,000 square feet and this office is 200 square feet, and I use this office, specifically for my business, I can actually take 20% of my rent expense or 20% of my mortgage expense and say, this is my office expense, even though it's not directly for the business. Cell phones is another good example of that. So what some people will do is they'll, open up a whole separate cell phone account line for their business, and then they can deduct that whole thing. If you don't do that, you can use your personal cell phone, and then you've got to say, I use it 10% of the time for the business, so I can deduct 10% of the bill.
Okay.
You've got to be able to justify all of these things, right? You've got to legitimately be able to say, I do use it 10% of the time for the business, and you got to be able to prove it with cell phone records or whatever. Same thing with the office. I had somebody ask me the other day specifically about vehicle expenses, right? So they travel a lot for their business.
Yeah.
And what the question was is, at what point does it make sense for the company to buy a vehicle?
Okay.
And
Yeah.
the answer to the question
what is the answer?
Yeah, so the answer to that question is it kind of doesn't matter.
Okay.
If you buy a vehicle and you use it specifically for the business, then you can write off all of the expenses for that vehicle. The insurance, the gas, the registration, the car payment, all of that stuff. If you don't use it exclusively for the business, then you've got to do the same thing that we talked about, where I use it 50% for the business. So I can take 50% of those expenses that I'm already paying, and I can use that as a deduction. So it kind of doesn't matter if you buy it specifically for the business or if you just have it for your own personal use, but you've got to track your usage of it for the business.
And you also have to not only do you have to track it, but you need to be ready to justify, right?
Absolutely.
So are there any thresholds or tests that are common or that you're aware of that you can share with those watching that might help them to determine what they can claim as a business expense?
So there's not really any, thresholds or tests. I mean, really what the
Rule
IRS
of
is
thumb or something.
the IRS is in the business of proof, right? So,
Well, they are.
I've got to have a receipt that says, this is gas for a business trip that I took on, April 12th.
Yes.
I drove to Orlando, and then I stayed in a hotel room in Orlando.
Yes.
And I had a meeting with so-and-so. That's if you document it in that manner, then the IRS is going to typically accept that sort of a thing, right?
Okay.
You can't just say, you can't get to the end of the year and be like, oh, well, I took these trips to, such and such, and it was for business. But if you document it and you keep your receipts and everything, then you can use those sorts of things as a deduction. And it's the same thing, like I said, with the office. If you can justify that, I don't use this office for anything else, then you're going to be in pretty good shape.
Yeah. So it sounds like it's crucial to keep track, right, of all of these potential deductions. Mm-hmm. So, speaking of which, do you have any tips or advice for keeping organized records of business expenses?
So there are a couple of tools. The first thing that kind of comes to mind, everybody probably has heard of QuickBooks. QuickBooks is it's an accounting software,
Ubiquitous.
right?
Yep.
It is pretty commonly used.
It's big.
Yep. You can link it with your bank accounts. You can link it with your credit cards, and then there's a pretty user-friendly interface that allows you to bring that information over from your bank or your credit card account, so that you don't have to sit and re-enter it. But if you keep track, I mean, this is really the biggest part of the expense management thing, is just keeping track of it when it happens, right? And if you do that, you're going to make your life a whole lot easier.
A lot easier.
A lot easier. I mean, if you're sitting down at the end of the week and you're spending an hour putting stuff in QuickBooks, it's kind of a pain in the ass, but it's way, way better than you get to, April of the following year and you're sitting here saying, oh, what in the world was I spending that on? And then you're spending a week trying to recreate stuff that, you likely forgot about what you even did.
Yeah. Oh, yes. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Well, I think probably most people probably do know what I'm talking about.
Goodness.
Because
I just don't know why it's so difficult for us to, hey, I spent $50 here, write it down, and then I can check. In the day of AI, in this AI era, it seems like it should be a snap of your fingers.
So you bring up a really interesting point there, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. But I really would highly recommend everybody would use QuickBooks or something similar to that. There are a few other accounting softwares out there that you can use, and most of them will link with your bank accounts. The one I've always used the most is QuickBooks. the other nice thing about that is you can send that QuickBooks file to your accountant at the end of the year, and they will just use that as the basis to generate your tax return. So it's going to save you money if you can send them that rather than walk into his office with a box full of receipts and says, "Hey, do my taxes for me."
Okay. So you're advocating using accounting software, first of all.
Absolutely, absolutely. And
Okay.
that's another thing that you can go to QuickBooks directly and buy it, or you can buy it from us. If you buy it from us, then you can get a discount.
Okay.
So there's a benefit for that as well. Specifically tracking expenses, they've got some pretty cool programs that are out there that make this process a whole lot easier. So one of the ones that I've used is called Expensify, and we've got a link for that
Oh,
here as well.
okay. Okay.
And so what it does is it really allows you to manage expenses. It allows you to manage them, and it allows you to track them better than QuickBooks would. And it's also got a feature in it that allows you to. So I talked about you've got to keep records of this stuff for the IRS.
Mm-hmm.
Expensify has a pretty cool feature. It's called e-receipts. And so what it does, it doesn't work like this for everything, but for a lot of receipts, if you just go and you charge something somewhere, you go buy dinner, you go buy gas, it'll actually capture from that transaction an electronic version of that receipt, so you don't have to keep it. And the IRS recognizes that as a legitimate receipt. So, if you're walking around, buying stuff and trying to keep your, 50 receipts every week in your wallet, you don't have to worry about that if you use Expensify.
And so is that if it's linked, your Expensify account is linked to your credit card?
Mm-hmm.
I imagine they probably even have an app or something where you could take your smartphone and take a photo and maybe even.
They absolutely do. So the ones that you don't get an e-receipt for, it does have an app, and it does have the ability to snap a photo of it. So you're going to have the ability to have receipts for everything that the IRS recognizes as legitimate, and you don't have to carry all these damn receipts around. And as you grow and add other employees, it'll allow you to actually track their expenditures at an employee level. And it'll allow you, they even have a credit card that you can apply for and get through that company. They do.
Oh, that kind of.
And you can manage limits of employees. So if I've got 3 employees, but I don't want them to spend more than $500 a month, I can just set that limit for that person. And you can see all of their expenses, and you can see what they're spending money on with the app. And the other nice thing about Expensify is it integrates with QuickBooks. So if you hook the two together, then it just automatically feeds all that information in for your business accounting stuff too.
Okay. So, as you explain that, just kind of brings one question up, categorizing. So does it matter? Should we categorize? And
we should.
If we should, how should we do it? Any advice on that front?
So, it's really the categorization, honestly. I mean, it matters for taxes and things like that, but really it matters most for you as a business owner and a business manager to see, what am I spending my money on, right? And this kind of ties back with the conversation that we had last week about, creating a budget. If I know that I have a budget of $1,000 a month for advertising, if I'm categorizing all of my things properly, then I can look at and say, okay, I actually spent $900 this month on advertising versus my $1,000 budget. That's good.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a matter of knowing, right? So that's really the main reason that we categorize things, is so we can track the progress of the business and see what it is that we're spending money on. So if I see that, all of a sudden I'm spending, $800 a month on office supplies, and I had only budgeted $200 a month, then it allows you to dig a little deeper and say, what the heck's going on here?
Okay. So use these accounting softwares, QuickBooks, Expensify, save your receipts, categorize, and as you said, regularly reconcile. So make an appointment, with yourself once a week, definitely once a month, so that you don't lose track, in order to keep everything organized. So, right, it's just about the deadline to file taxes. So I'm
It is.
imagining everyone across the nation is scrambling to put together their stuff, and so it will be a big help if you have actually kept organized.
There, it's funny that you say that. There are probably, tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people literally right this second that are pulling their hair out saying, what the hell did I spend at,
Yeah,
Publix
yeah,
$4.85 for on, February 4th of 2023. And if you just
yeah.
do it, and it is absolutely right. If you just block out a period of time, say, Monday
Friday
morning
night or Monday
or Friday
morning.
night, yeah, I'm going to spend an hour and a half and I'm just going to keep track of everything that's happened during the week. It's going to make your life so much easier.
Yeah, so much easier. And that is on the heels of our discussion last week about budgeting. You know, actively budgeting is almost an integral part of, tracking business expenses, right? They're hand in glove. They're almost, they need each other, right? So
They do.
we want to advocate for our listeners, for all small business people, entrepreneurs, to do their very best to initiate a budget, to be an active budgeter, and to also keep good track of their business expenses, because it's going to make your business a lot better and it's going to make your life a lot easier. So these are all good pieces of advice. Now, before we sort of wrap up this discussion, do you have any other thoughts or, recommendations for our listeners? Anything else that they should take away from this discussion about business expenses?
We've covered the high level things here. I guess the other thing that I would say is work with your accountant on this. They can
Yes.
help you. They can absolutely help you save money. There are a ton of expenses that I did not talk about, but it's and it can get very, very detailed. But your accountant will be able to help you with that. We just kind of hit this high level, and it's kind of I think the goal of what I'm trying to do here is
Yes.
start thinking about the things that you're using. It's you use a lot of things to run your business, right? And the IRS takes these things as legitimate business expenses. So don't give Uncle Sam any more money than you need to.
No, no, definitely not. And yeah, the tools that we're using are increasing day by day, it seems. We've
Right.
got something new, like we talked last week, a new subscription service or some new project. It's constant. We're constantly facing it. We're changing all the time. So it's imperative that you track this stuff. So excellent. Wise words, Mark, from an experienced financial expert. So appreciate you sharing your, your thoughts on this matter. And so we just want to take this opportunity to remind everyone that taking the initiative on budgeting and also tracking your business expenses is a practice that every small businessman or businesswoman should undertake, should be very mindful of. And so, yeah, that is the sort of the moral of today's talk is, yeah, business expenses, keep on top of them early and often, and you will thank yourself for that.
Absolutely.
So, at any rate, that concludes our discussion about business expenses. We appreciate everybody coming to listen to us. If you have any thoughts, questions, or comments, please leave them in the description below. We'd love to hear it. And make sure you also take the time to recommend any kind of subject matter that you'd like Mark and I to discuss. All right? That's what I'd like to say for today. Appreciate it, Mark.
Thanks, John. It's good talking to you as always.
Cheers.